Thank you, first off, for joining us this afternoon. Today we're going to be discussing a topic that affects the teams that we work on, how we interact on those teams, and whether we succeed. And also a topic that affects our consumers and how they interact with our products, and even the extent to whether they're able to experience our products. I come from the machine learning and AI world, and I have witnessed facial recognition apps that have not been able to pick up on certain users because of the color of their skin. Something that could have been, and that's because people like them weren't represented in the data sets that were training the products, the algorithms that made the products finally. Things that could be easily fixed. As the technology ecosystem in Seattle thrives, we have a responsibility as technologists to be mindful of our ever-changing population and world at large. And so today we'll be discussing ways that diversity can drive better teams and better products. So I'm honored to have these panelists here, and I'm excited for them to share their stories in this space. And I'm going to go ahead and let them introduce themselves. We'll start with Ling.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Ling Chiang. I come from Metis. Metis is a data science training company, and we provide, a full-time immersive data training program as well as part-time courses and corporate courses. I am a senior data scientist at Metis, and I'm also the data science bootcamp instructor. Yeah, I'm really glad to be here. This is my first PyData. I was talking to my friends yesterday, and I was trying to go to the bathroom before, in between. Sorry, I'm taking too long. But in between. But let me tell this thing. But then I realized there are actually lines at the men's bathroom where there's no line at the women's bathroom. So I was so thrilled, right? So I was oh my God, this never happens. Whenever I go out to theaters or amusement parks, there's always a line in a women's bathroom. And my friend was that's exactly the problem. I was that's so true, right? So thank you so much. I feel so great that I can be on this panel. We'll talk about a lot of interesting things.
Okay, hi, I'm Andrea Bryce, and I'm launching my own startup called Visi Solutions, and it's a company that's meant to bring big data to small businesses. I come out of wireless telecommunications. I started with Macaw in 1989 when there was an analog system, and I was part of what was a consciously inclusive hiring program. I was the only woman field tech in the US for quite some time, and there was no big data at that time. So I actually started innovating, pulling data from my network elements to try to figure out where I needed to go during the day to take things. And then the next thing you know, however many years later, we're talking enterprise systems and ginormous data sets, and big data was out there in the world. So I had a career grow up around it. It was kind of cool.
Hi, everyone. I'm Charlotte Flanagan. I'm our Global Diversity and Inclusion Lead at Concur over in Bellevue. And a lot of people, including my dad, continuously ask me, what does that mean? And so essentially what I do in the short and sweet version is really try to create programs and policies that attract, retain, and engage a really diverse set of employees, and beyond what we typically think of diversity as well. We're trying to really expand on how we define diversity, and then also weave in how does inclusion play a role in that, and then also even beyond that, what does belonging look like as well. So I'll speak to some of that.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tina Marie Gully. I am a marketing leader and Chick Tech Seattle director. I had to see what it had up there. I've been working in tech for 10 plus years. So I'm a former Concurian. I've worked at startups and large companies, and oftentimes I am either the only woman, the only person of color, the only woman of color. So diversity and inclusion is something that's very passionate to me. And at Chick Tech specifically, we really look to empower women and girls to pursue technology careers. As you all know, we're always having conversations about pipeline and ensuring that women are getting a place at the table in terms of leadership. So we really try to provide a resource to women to do that, and then also the opportunities for young girls to develop those resources to learn what they want to do, because tech is more than coding. So we try to really provide role models and education to K through 12 girls.
Hi everyone, I'm James. I'm one of the volunteers here at PyData Seattle. In a semi-official capacity, I serve as an officer to the board of NumFocus. I serve as the vice president in charge of, or with the purview over, global PyData conferences. This is the second PyData conference I've attended in 2 weeks. So I can tell you that initiatives like this diversity panel are incredibly important to NumFocus. NumFocus's core mission is the promotion of open source scientific computing, which requires that it exists in the context of an open, fair, free, and diverse community.
All right, thank you all for introducing yourselves. And before we get started, I'll briefly introduce myself. My name is Dominique Davis. I'm an applied research scientist at Dimensional Mechanics. It's an artificial intelligence startup just down the road on 156 in the Bellevue Tech Center. I have a cognitive psychology background by trade and by my previous research, and I found my way into the AI space. I build AI models for enterprise, and we're building a software platform for developers to build AI models, even if they're not experts in AI and ML. So I enjoy my job. I also am a community engagement lead for ABI Seattle, which is, for those of you who don't know, it's the Seattle chapter of the Anita Borg Institute. They, as you may know, host the Grace Hopper Celebration of Women in Computing every year, international conference. So, and just so you know, there's going to be a GHC1, I'm going to do a shameless plug, GHC1 mini Grace Hopper one day here in November 11th, Veterans Day. Okay, so we have that out of the way. We're going to go ahead and get started. My first question is for Ling. What obstacles have you encountered in building a diverse community?
Great. So thanks so much. That's an excellent question. So what difficulties or obstacles that I encountered when building a community? There are many levels of this question, and I know we can dive deep into it later, but on the surface, there are two components. The first is building a diversified community is not always the first priority there. So there, we'll go into this a bit later, but the second thing is, even with the very conscious intention to build a diversified community, it's simply just really hard to find those diverse candidates. So I understand that diversity is not just, I want to make sure that we all understand diversity is not just one-dimensional thing. It's not just, gender, it's not just race. It's really about background. It's really about what you bring, what the different diversified skills, right? But let's take gender as an example, like the example I was referring to before. So as matters, we're trying to hire data scientists, we're trying to train data science, but throughout the whole pipeline, it's just difficult. It's just hard to find, for example, female candidate, female students. Even the applications come in and we don't have as many females, right? So what is the problem there? Why is it so hard? Why are they just not there? I think in general, it's because we are actually not building this community from scratch. We already have a community. There is already the tech community, sort of the data science community there. So we're actually inherent a lot of bias or inheriting a lot of the legacy from before. So what happens is that we're trying to we're easily biased to try to find people like us, and people like us are encouraged to approach us and join the community. So that's one of the things that I feel is really the obstacle is the role models or the mentors that we have available for the people that are interested in joining this community, especially for the underrepresented groups, like for example, women or people of color. So the thing is, why is there not enough role models? Because there aren't, let's take example of gender, there aren't any women, so that other women feel intimidated to approach and join this community, and then this community doesn't have any more women. So this is a vicious cycle, and it feels like there's nothing that we can do. Oh, thank you so much. But I think I would advocate just very conscious efforts in building mentorships and building and becoming role models and sort of really propelling other people's careers or people that are actually junior of you, propelling their careers and supporting them as a very conscious effort. All right, I want to go back to the first point where I say a lot of the time the diversity is not the highest priority. Sorry, I think I'm out of time. But let me just say this one thing. We build teams not all at once. If I need 10 people on my team, it's easy to find diversity. But we're building team members one at a time. So every time when I'm looking for that one person, there's a different priority, right? So then when I'm doing it one at a time, it's very easy to forget about the other priorities.
Thank you, Ling. And you brought up a great point about diversity and the fact that it's beyond gender and beyond race. A lot of people forget diversity of thought, and that's critical in teams. It's something to keep in mind, respecting others' opinions and ideas, and really championing those ideas. Andrea, what lessons can you share about overcoming these obstacles?
Well, in 1989, wireless was an industry that was a Frankenstein mash of a variety of technologies. So there was also nobody that had ever trained in wireless telecommunications. So they were really responding to an environment that had no precedent. So they were looking for a variety of skill sets. They were looking for variety in their skill sets. So they were hiring people who were great at wiring, but had no college degree. They took people out of the military. I was straight out of engineering school in the lab. And so it was more a matter of trying to find people who were adaptable and excited about the questions that were being asked in the business. One of the other things is that they really were not concerned with the idea of trying to follow some sort of objective measure of competency. We had a lot of people that washed out just simply because the rate of change in wireless telecommunications and the technology rips were pretty merciless. So competency couldn't even be judged based on having had a successful career in one industry and migrating into telecommunications. As a field tech, we did have some women that did apply for jobs, but when they interviewed with me and I was telling them, you're going to be up on the middle of Index, driving up a logging road in the middle of the night with snow coming down, or 4th and Pike building on a Saturday night, and you're parking your truck out in the alley and you're hauling your equipment up the stairs, how's that feel for you? A lot of women didn't want to do that, to the point where my director came and asked me, what are you scaring the women off for? I'm like, I've just been sitting in battery acid. You can't, So we eventually did bring in more women that were interested in that kind of work because it pays really well. But the point is that they were freed at that time from trying to say, oh, they have this degree. Oh, they can do that. One of the best engineers we ever took was self-trained out of customer care. So what does it take to be good at your type of work? If you're looking for people to repeat the answers back that you're expecting, then you're looking at a job that's worth replacing with a robot. So anyways.
You can keep that.
Okay.
All right. So Tina, actually, yeah, we're going to skip a person. Tina, what actionable advice do you have for someone who's trying to increase understanding of the value of building a diverse community?
Very good question. I think one thing is going beyond lip service. A lot of us, will say, oh yeah, diversity and inclusion is really important. But what are you doing? Are you attending events around diversity and inclusion? Are you following leaders around diversity and inclusion? And going beyond global leaders, looking into your local area, seeing who are kind of the folks that are speaking about it. What can you learn? What are the insights that they have to share that you can bring back to your organization? I think that's very important. Also, just showing up to groups that don't look like you. I think that's number one. We need the majority to be a part of that. So that means that men need to show up for women, and that Caucasian people need to show up for people of color. Abled people need to show up for people that are disabled, and so on and so forth. We all just need to show up for each other. I think the other thing is understanding what unconscious bias is and try to understand, the mechanics behind it. And that's on every level, from, somebody who's part of a team to a hiring manager to folks that are on leadership. We all have it. And so the biggest way to kind of get past it is to understand why you make those decisions and try to train your brain not to, or just be aware of those decisions. And I think the other thing is changing diversity inclusion from an issue, changing your mindset so it's a human issue and a business issue, right? And not just like, oh, it'll be nice to just have diversity inclusion. We know that more diverse teams build better products. They make better business decisions. And so all around, it's just diversity is a better thing. And so we all just need to kind of change that mindset there. And then I would say the other thing would be, as we create job descriptions, really start analyzing those things. Some of the things that we are putting down in the list of must-haves are really not must-haves, And so once we start to change that kind of mindset, we really try to find the best candidate based off of what they can do versus, these weird objectives that don't really mean anything. And I think the last thing that I would say, because I'm in marketing, is, being able to collect data. When you have interviews, when you're looking at who to promote, really analyzing the data. So going beyond, yes, we have 50 women that do this type of job. Well, what's the technical element of their jobs? How many people are in leadership, and are we empowering people? So really looking at that data, analyzing it, and holding yourself accountable. We all, regardless of our role, need to help with diversity and inclusion.
That was a great list of actionable insights. I hope you were taking notes on that. One thing you talked about is immersing yourself in an environment that you're not quite used to. That stands for all of us. At Tech Inclusion, a few weeks back, I used a gender-neutral bathroom at the same time that men were in there for the first time, and that was a very eye-opening experience for me. It just, we all carry assumptions, and when you challenge yourself to put yourself in that different environment, it helps you question and challenge those assumptions. All right. So James, I have a question for you. What examples have you encountered where a project was improved by having a diverse team?
So I'd actually like to hand off this question to the chair of PyData Seattle, Brett Cannon. As many of you know, Brett is I think 15 or 16-year CPython core contributor. And as many of you know, the CPython core contribution group has embarked for, I think, almost 2 years now on a deliberate campaign to cultivate and recruit a more diverse set of CPython core contributors. And I think Brett might be able to speak very specifically to why they've put so much effort behind this. Brett?
Thank you for putting me on the spot, James. Yeah, so as James said, I've actually been a core contributor to Python now since 2003, so 14 years. And we actually got our first female core contributor last October, I believe, and we got our second one. Kara Willing from Jupiter, I think is known to some of you in the audience. And specifically what I found with having Marietta and Carol down on the team is obviously a different viewpoint, and also a better focus in terms of trying to get more people to join. Obviously, there's unconscious bias, as it's been mentioned, and obviously, I suffer from, I'm sure we all do in some form or another, and so getting that first person through the door was really important to help have someone help off balance any unconscious bias we may have had on the core team, because we all knew we had a diversity problem, and we tried to solve it the best we could, but obviously, because we didn't suffer from it, it was hard to try to figure out exactly the best mechanism to make that work. And now that we've pushed through that initial problem, gotten the first people through the door, I've personally found that both Marietta and Carol have been really good about trying to reach out and getting more people to come in and help, because unfortunately they were in a minority position and had to figure out how to get more people engaged through PyLadies and such. And because of that, they're much better at actually engaging with new contributors to the project, and thus helping get more people even more involved. So it's kind of led to somewhat of a cascading effect of getting those first people through the door to help with our diversity problem to getting more people involved. And I'm seeing more and more women actually contributing now on GitHub for Python, and just seeing a nice follow through.
Thank you, Brett, for answering that. You brought up a good point of that first initial, just getting over that hump. That's it's critical, and I mean, it can be super tough. You know, you don't want to have those conversations, or you're not sure how to navigate to get, have those conversations and get past that. But once you do, it's totally worth it. Then you're able to see all of the fruits of your labor, so to speak. You're seeing, a more diverse community, a thriving community, more ideas generated. It's a good thing. Okay, so this is to James or Brett, either one of you. In the wake of some high-profile HR scandals in tech, shall be remain nameless, how can we, as a tech community, build more inclusive workplaces?
I think in this question you allude to things such as the Holder Report, in which we see patterns of behavior that are so egregious and so outside the bounds of human decency that it's very difficult to give an organization like that any concrete advice other than stop or don't. I mean, you should know that this behavior is wrong, and you should know that treating people in your organization in this fashion is wrong. And it's difficult for me to intellectualize or moralize or rationalize why it's wrong, since it seems so plain on its face. What I would say, though, is in many ways, I think the PyData community parallels the experience I have in industry, because I come from front office trading finance and the IT surrounding that. And while the front office itself, the traders themselves, are exactly the boys' club that you might imagine, the IT group has always been very professionalized. It's very much a 9-to-5 job. There really isn't that much concern about somebody's gender or ethnic background. It really is do your work, go home, and spend time with your family. That said, even in light of that, you look at a group where nobody seemed to care whether a programmer was female or male, what ethnicity they were, and yet there were no female senior managers, and yet there were 3 women in a team of 150 people. So clearly, even in the lack of this egregious, horrible behavior, there are still some serious systematic biases at work that need to be questioned and need to be investigated. And I think that much of the work that we have to do is a lot more subtle than what we see in the case of these high-profile HR scandals, where nobody has to be told, don't hit on your subordinates, that's wrong. Or if somebody comes to you and they're pitching to you and you're a VC, don't tell them, I don't know whether or not to ask you out to dinner or to fund you. I mean, everybody knows that's just outside the bounds of what you should do. I think the real question is what kind of unconscious or what kind of hidden biases we have, such that when we look at the system structurally and we don't see any outright forms of discrimination, somehow coincidentally, none of these systems seem to mirror the actual populations that we have in technology. There are an abundance of people in senior management roles that just manage to follow a very specific pattern. I think it then is very much an open question as to how do we identify these biases and how do we address them head on? Because I think that many of them are really outside of what we can immediately intuit or see or tangibly feel right now.
Sure.
So I just want to add something. There's a really great article out there. It's, I forget what publication it's from, but it's basically it's called Why Silicon Valley is So Horrible to Women. So I'm sure a number of you have probably read that. Atlantic Monthly, thank you. And it highlights different, beyond just the blatant sexual harassment that a lot of women face in the workforce. It goes beyond that to even just in interviews, the things that candidates even will completely dismiss talking to a female VP. I mean, there are very, very interesting examples of the way that inclusion or lack thereof can show up in the workplace, and I would highly recommend all of you to read it. It is a lengthy one, but it's definitely worth it.
So it's good that you picked up the mic because you're up next. Charlotte, what tips do you have for diversity candidates when they're trying to find a job?
Yeah. I was thinking a lot about this, and I don't know that my advice would be all that different to anyone. Like, I think my advice is pretty much the same. And it is that if you are really interested in a specific, first of all, look at companies. Look at the company where you want to be, because that culture, what they stand for, will absolutely determine how long you're going to be there. And then if you find a company that you love, reach out to people either who you know or either who have a job title that's yours. Reach out to them on LinkedIn and offer to buy them coffee. I had an intern who I met at UW 8 or 9 years ago that followed back up with me. To be honest, I barely even remembered her. And she finally, I was previously with Alaska Airlines, and she went to Alaska and interned there. And I didn't even know that she ended up there. I met her at a career fair. She just reached back out to me because she's really interested in coming to Concur. And I had lunch with her. I connected her with someone who does the job that she wants. And that's the kind of relationships that you can have and that you can build that are so important. And so I think that would be my main advice, is just network like crazy. And if you hear no or you don't hear from people, just don't let it get you down. Keep going and keep reaching out to people if you're really interested in a certain company.
I would add something to that as well. I think that's great. And also, when you are building your network and you're connecting with people, just be open-minded. You never know down the road how you might connect with that person down the road. So just, keep an open mind.
One last point, and I'm sure many of you in this room know, when it comes to applying for jobs or even thinking that you're eligible to apply for a job. I don't know if everyone in this room has heard the statistic, but it's something like women, when they apply for their job, feel like they need to meet 90% of the criteria that's listed as required on a job description, whereas men, it's more like 60 to 70% of the required stuff that's on a job description. So my other piece of advice would be don't limit yourself. If you feel like, but it says 3 to 5 years, I only have 2 years, just go for it. That would be my other piece of advice too.
So, turning the table a bit, what tips do you have for a team that's hiring and to avoid hiring bias?
So there's actually a lot of really cool technology that's out there right now that I would definitely recommend. A couple companies, one's local, it's called Textio. So they work on job descriptions and ensuring that the job descriptions that you're posting are more inclusive and will attract a more diverse candidate pool. There's also another company called Talent Sonar that I am really, really hoping that we'll start using at Concur. And they essentially help any organization from job posting, from creating that job description, but then it follows and helps train your hiring managers, because that's where the bias really creeps in, is the team that's doing the hiring. And so how do you remove the bias at every single process, from posting the job to reviewing the candidates to creating questions that actually tie back to the job description, not random questions like, what do you like to do? Do you go skiing? What college did you go to? It's more tying the questions that you're going to ask and identifying and setting the interviewers up for success. I love that Microsoft, you have to go through like a full-on course to become an interviewer at Microsoft. I think that is amazing. Because unless you do that, unless you're setting the team up for success throughout the hiring process, that's where biases are going to creep in. And there's a number of different biases. I think the biggest offender, I would say, is the like me bias. When you have two candidates who are exactly from more or less the same qualifications. If you get along with someone because they're a Seahawks fan or because they like to go skiing on the weekends, you're going to build a natural rapport with them way more, and your perception of them is going to be skewed significantly. And so ensuring that you're sticking to structured questions and questions that you ask the same candidates, all the same questions, that's how you can remove bias throughout the hiring process.
You made a great note about avoiding bias at every level. We typically think of job postings, and then we think of the interview process, but really there are multiple points at which a candidate can get scrapped because of something that could have been avoided. And the idea of setting the team up or the applicant up for success. So thinking about how the applicant can be included on the team rather than that exclusion mindset. That's great. Okay. Ling, what advice do you have regarding performance reviews or promotions?
Right. So promotions. Oh my God. So actually, there's an interesting story. I was just reading an article a couple months ago, and it was a survey that actually looked at salaries in, I think they only did San Francisco and New York. So they were looking at salaries in the tech industry, like software engineers, data science, and all that. And they were seeing that on the entry level, so on the very entry level, men and women are actually making roughly the same. I think men still make a tiny bit more, but it's not too much. It's that they're mostly leveled. And as they both advance in their careers, so when they look at the 3 to 5 years of experience bracket, they started to see that men are actually making much more than women. So the author of the article is like reasoning this as in, when you're a fresh grad, when you're just entering the market, you're actually getting equal pay. But women along their careers are less likely to ask for promotions. So then after 3 to 5 years, then men have higher chances of making more money because of promotion. Right, so I read this and I felt it was okay. I was like, it's reasonable, and this problem is easily fixable. We can just ask women or encourage women to speak up a little bit more and really reach out and ask for promotions very consciously, right? And then I'm not kidding you, on the same day, in the afternoon, I read another article. There was another survey, so it was also about sort of the same thing, but they were surveying team dynamics, and the survey was saying men who ask for promotions at their jobs are perceived as positively because they're really taking the stance, they're taking initiative, and women, on the contrary, when they ask for promotions among the team members, they're actually perceived more negatively because they feel like they're asking for too much, they're demanding too much, and I was no, wait. So it's I was this is good because this is a problem that's easily fixable. And suddenly, this is not a win-win situation. This is a lose-lose situation. I can't do anything right. So if I don't ask for promotion, I don't get promotion. If I ask for promotion, I'm perceived more negatively as more demanding. So there's no, like, I can't do it right. There's no way for me to do anything right. So I was really pissed off by that. So I think in the face of these sort of conflicting, yes, thank you, Karen. In the face of these conflicting sort of stats, what it really says is that we need to more, it's not about asking for promotion, it's really about, you know, a continuous ongoing communication with your manager about performance and about promotion, so that you don't have to ask for promotion only when you need or when you want a promotion. Thank you. So it should be a constant check with where your career goals are and communicate that to your manager so that you're on the same page. So then it's not too hard to bring up the question when you really want a promotion.
So what you've talked about is really about, you know, transparency between the employee and the manager and mentor and whatnot. That way it doesn't get bottled up and, yeah. All right, so let's see. Tina, what advice do you have for managers to create a trusting workplace?
That's a good question. Okay, so I would definitely say the leader needs to serve as a role model. Again, not just lip service, actually, you know, be transparent. That was something that you were saying. So, you know, lots of times as people that maybe aren't on the leadership team, you know, we become frustrated because we don't know what's going on in the business and how decisions are being made. So it's always good to, you know, make sure that that the rest of the team is always kind of involved or kind of knows what's going on. I would say that we really need to make an effort to learn more about people. A lot of times we look at people and we assume that we know about them and we don't. And especially when you're working in those team dynamics, it's really important to do those team outings, although I know sometimes they can be a little annoying, but it's a good way to kind of set up rapport and get to know the people that you work with. I would also say that when you are listening, to listen with an empathetic ear. I think a lot of times, you know, we tend to think of our own issues and don't necessarily take the time to listen to other people. I would also say that, it's a long question. Also just be aware of yourself. And kind of what you could be doing to kind of to change the outlook in your team, within your group, to change that dynamic. And also I always believe in having like great feedback loops for everything that you do. So whether those be interviews, whether that be changing processes, systems, just always like clearly communicate those things. And I think that's about it.
All right. I think we have time for one more question, quick question. Andrea, what resources or social networks do you use when you don't know how to resolve a challenging workplace question or situation or conflict?
Nevertheless, she persisted. Sometimes being the only in a group is not just lonely, but there have actually been studies that show it directly affects performance. I was very lucky to have been hired in Seattle. I worked with guys that respected what I had to say, would joke with me, respond to my ideas in a positive manner, who I could argue with. We talked about wrestling, you know, techs wrestling like pigs in mud, just loving it, without any negative repercussions. When I went outside of market, it was not that way. So it actually culminated one night after a 24-hour shift and a retune that was not good, and some technology that didn't operate as specified. And so I did something that was not per spec, but it made it work. I had power where I needed to have power. And I went back and I told the guys, here's what you're going to find at this location, and here's why I did what I did, and here's what you're going to see. And they went back and changed it all according to spec. So that meant that what was radiating out at the antennas was literally, a fraction of the amount of power that needed to, make it out of the system. I'm like, why did you do that? And one person finally had the guts to answer. He's like, these guys weren't going to listen to you. You're a woman. Okay. It happens. So, but I was tired and I was stressed and I was really frustrated, and I went back to Seattle and I told my boss, I said, why am I even here? If I can't get the job, do the job well, and have people listen to what I have to say, what's the point? He goes, that's them, that's not us. And you're a good tech, and don't leave, don't quit. So, it's moments like that where having the team makes a difference in a person's career. And if you can be that teammate to somebody who's the only, because there were no social networks. Yeah, I'm old. So, I read books like Women Who Run with Wolves and A Simpler Way, but, it was my teammates that helped me make it through. And I worked with some of the most amazing people in one of the most amazing technologies, in a technological revolution. So be a good teammate for somebody who's a solo.
So I just want to add really quick, we have the snack period, so the next talk's not till 3:50. So if you want a little more time, you guys have it.
Oh, perfect. Okay. I want to say thank you, Andrea, for leaving us on that high note. I made a note earlier to be a champion for someone else. If you hear an idea that they may, because inside you don't know what's going on. You don't know whether they might be a little bit shaky about it, but they want to project it to the team anyway. Say, hey, that's a great idea. How can we take that further? How can we explore different options? I'm sure that person will appreciate that, and that'll go far. Let's see. All right. Well, yes, that's what I was going to do. So I'd like to open it up to everyone. If you have a question for the panel, please have at.
Taking Runner literally today.
So the title of this panel is How Diversity Drives Excellence in Our Data-Driven Tech World, but isn't framing diversity in terms of it's good for your business rather than a social justice issue make it extremely easy to say, well, it doesn't seem to be doing all that much for the bottom line, so let's throw less resources at it. And isn't that a lot of the time what we see? Is it marginalized?
I want to say something about it. I actually want to say something about it because I genuinely believe like diversity actually drives excellence for the whole business, including the bottom line. So I want to make an analogy. We're at PyData, so like we have a lot of people wrangling with data scientists. So there's something in the machine learning world called ensemble models, right? So for example, take a simple example. We have random forest, or maybe we have stacking classifier. Let's say I want to do this classification, right? I want to stack 3 classifiers together. Would you have 3 classifiers that are logistic regression, and logistic regression, and stack them together? It's not going to work, right? So when you do ensemble methods, you will stack a tree model, a logistic regression, maybe a Bayesian model, and then collectively they do a much better job at predicting whatever like conversion rate or ads, like whatever you want to do, right? So why does it happen that way? Because each model have a different underlying assumption that fits to certain pattern within the data. So when you have one model, you're actually making some underlying assumptions, and if the data doesn't really fit this kind of assumption, or maybe the data was generated from a different process, this one model is not going to work. It's the same thing with people. Like we're all people that's why diversity in background and diversity in skills is just as important as gender or all the other things that we talk about explicitly. We need people that don't think all the same thing if we're all like full of people in a room, but we all think alike. Like, what's the point of having like all the people like just uttering the same thoughts, right? So.
It's both. You have to speak to it from both aspects of it. You have to have the business case diversity, and you have to have the it's the right thing to do. And if leaders aren't speaking to that, I mean, you could Google business case for diversity, and you can see literally hundreds of studies that have been done about the impact that diversity has on the bottom line, on productivity, on employee engagement, on turnover, on a number of different statistics. And in my opinion, to ignore that is pure ignorance. So that would be my response. The other response is that you have to take that data to leadership, and you have to get their buy-in at whatever company that you work in, because they're the ones that are providing the resources to the diversity and inclusion initiatives.
So my question was, for those of us who've been like solos, how do you deal with, what are practical steps that you've done to deal with imposter syndrome, even at your job, or constantly doubting that you're good enough even though you are?
Can I take this one? Because I just went through this. So I am new to Concur. I've only been with Concur for about a year. And I went to my sister, who's 10 years older than me, and I said, this job feels a lot bigger than I think I'm really ready for. And she told me a story, and I'm probably totally going to mess it up, but Jen Mueller is a local sports broadcaster, or not broadcaster, I think like journalist maybe. And she talks about this story when she interviewed, and apologies for using sports analogies, but she interviewed a assistant head coach for a college or university, and someone like the head coach left or something, and she was like, so are you going to be taking on the head coach role? And he said no. She said, so you tell me if so-and-so didn't come to you and said, I want you to be the head coach, then you would turn it down. He said, no, I'd take it. He's like, well, you just said you weren't ready for it. He said, if they think I'm ready for it, then I'm ready for it. So if you're going through something and you're having self-doubt, my biggest piece of advice is to reach out to someone, reach out to your network, and talk through it, for sure. And just honestly believe that you can. And there's a great TED Talk about the power posing, and I swear it works. So do that before interviews. I did it in the Concur elevator up to my final interview, and I'm not ashamed to share that.
And I'd like to add, because I've worked with more technology rips, and having to start over. Everything I knew was gone. We just ripped, one vendor to a next. It's, one, AMPS to TDMA to GSM, blah, 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 blah. You're always starting over. When you just start getting used to not knowing, and you start developing the skills of jumping in and not knowing anything and starting over again. And once you've done it a couple of times, honestly, it gets boring.
Let me just add one more thing. So there's something called the Donner-Kruger syndrome in psychology. So what happens is when people are giving tests, so the people that actually score lower on the test overestimated themselves much more than people that actually scored higher on the test. So if you're actually pretty good, you will underestimate yourself and be like, oh, I'm not that good. But if you really don't know nothing about it, you're like, oh yeah, I totally know it. So to have imposter syndrome is, number one, just means you're human, and number two, probably means that you're actually more self-aware and underestimating yourself, which means in turn you might be actually well above on the curve. So that might be a good thing.
Can I ask a question? How many men in this room have ever heard that term, imposter syndrome? And how many women? Pretty even. Interesting.
I've got a question. I heard you talking about the importance of person number one, and I realized with shocking self-doubt, oh my gosh, I have stepped away from being person number one on a team. I've looked at teams and said, oh my God, I'd be the only woman. They probably won't listen to me. And I've had all this talk of oh, they won't listen to me. I'll have a hard time getting heard in meetings. And so I've always been person number two. And so now I'm wondering, maybe there's something we could do to try to encourage people to be person number one.
Yeah. Okay. Having been person number one, all I can say is I like to. So at this point in my career, I try to spend a lot of time mentoring younger women. And one of the biggest things I find is just getting them to speak up, speak out, and speak loudly. And so what if you make a mistake? Who cares? We're the ones who say, apologize. Guys don't go around apologizing, but we will. And you know what? That's okay. But that's actually one of the things that we bring as a positive thing. So I don't know. I mean, fear of failure, fear of making a fool of yourself, fear of. You know, if you're not walking towards your fears, then I don't know. To me, that says to me that it's again, it's like having all the answers already. It gets boring. So I'd say if you're A, frightened, B, don't know what the heck you're doing, and C, at least trying to take a chance, then that's where you're growing.
Yeah, I always say you should make yourself feel uncomfortable. You never want to just be stagnant.
And then ask when you can bring another one onto the team.
Yep.
And just to address that, there's also, there's two sides of this, right? There's the person who's going to be the first person to join a group, and then there's also the people who are already in the group welcoming the person in. So there's two sides to it, and it really can make a difference. I kind of have this turn of phrase where I say, you can't just open the door, you have to welcome people through it. So it really does come down to whether or not you're going to be going into a situation where you feel like the group is going to be welcoming you in as knowing full well, all right, you are the first woman, first minority, first whatever, and they're welcoming of that and understand that and can at least try to address their unconscious bias that they probably have. Because, I mean, honestly, we all have it, whether we want to admit it or not. I mean, I'll fully admit I have it. We all do the best we can to minimize it, but it's there. So at least if they're willing to admit to it, have you come in and try to say, all right, we're going to work on trying to deal with it, that helps a lot as well to make it a much more welcoming environment for the person who's going to be the first person through the door.
Are there any more questions?
We can do one more, but we just have to keep it short. I'm like, there's still 3.5 minutes. We can make it. We'll make it work.
So, any thoughts from you guys on basically retaining and attracting folks that are experiencing the unconscious bias and stuff like that, but also making it welcoming for those who want to support that effort, if that makes sense. So I've been a solo as well, and I've been welcomed onto my team. But that's because those folks were, given permission to do so, if that makes sense. It was okay to do it. So how do we foster that? Sorry, I'm really nervous. I don't know why.
I think the biggest thing here is when we see that it needs to be done and there's not a group or a thing that's already built to build it. So that means going to your manager, going to HR and saying, hey, these, there's a group of people that are having some issues. Like, I'd like to create a program that really fosters relationships so we can help them be happy at their job and not and provide support for these people. So whether it be people of color, women, anyone else in the spectrum of diversity, because we know it's so many things, just creating those processes where they feel supported and groups where they can kind of talk about things together, share their shared experiences. I think it's easier in some of the larger groups, a lot of them do have ERGs, but I think the cool thing about smaller companies and startups is that they're able to be more nimble and create it really fast and kind of learn as they do it. I think you, Alejandra, actually could probably speak to some things that she's done. If you want to catch her offline, she's a great example of what she's done at CDK Global in terms of fostering that environment for women and women of color too.
Right. Well, I personally want to thank all of you. I have a wife in tech who works as a lead at a development company. We spent a lot of nights talking about this, and thank you so much for sharing with us what it's like to experience this and how to get over this stuff. Let's all give them a round of applause.